Beloveds, good morning. Welcome to worship. It is so good to be together. As we arrive to this time, to this place, I invite you just to take a moment to look around, see those gathered here with you. If you're on Zoom, maybe for a moment go into gallery mode, just notice. Notice this collection of God's beloved gathered together this day to worship. And as we notice, as we celebrate, I invite us to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, reminded that God is closer to you than the breath that you breathe. To acknowledge God's closeness and the presence of Christ here in our midst, we light our Christ candle, a symbol that once there was a man who said such incredible things and did such wonderful things that people began to follow him. And after a while, they began asking, "Who are you?" To which he replied, "I am the light." We gather together around, with, and through this light of Christ, sign and symbol of God's beloved community. And as we gather, we also acknowledge this place where we are today, this place and all the places, because indeed this community is expansive through technology. So for those of you joining on Zoom, if you're gathered on a traditional territory other than what I'm about to name, and you know the name of it, I'd invite you to put the territory where you are into the chat space in Zoom, and I will name aloud this place where we are, those of us here in the sanctuary. So friends, this has been a site of human activity for more than 15,000 years. This land is territory of the Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Seneca, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is home to many, many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and in our gathering, we acknowledge this and we offer gratitude. At the same time, we also acknowledge broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations. Friends, I invite you to please join me in our responsive call to worship. What are you looking for? The light before dawn. What are you looking for? The reason to hope. What are you looking for? Joy after grief and flowers after winter. What are you looking for? A place to belong. What are you looking for? We are looking for the Messiah. Good news. Come in. Love is alive. Surely God is in this place.
Good morning. Today's reading is taken from John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. But Thomas, who was called the twin, was not with the 12. Then when Jesus came, so the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, believe." Then Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing you may have life in his name. These are the words of life, which in faith become the living word.
So on the first day of the week, interesting allusion to new beginnings. The disciples are still in Jerusalem after Jesus has been crucified, and this weird thing called the resurrection has begun to take place. The lives of the disciples are in danger, because there are powers that seek to do to them what was done to Jesus. So they're hiding behind locked doors, contained by fear. And then, poof, Jesus is there. And he's saying to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. And if you retain the sins of any, they are retained." Friends, this is resurrection. You will notice that there's no gospel story that describes Jesus' dead body coming alive in the tomb, Jesus sort of standing up and stretching and cracking his neck, causing the stone to roll away somehow, stepping out into the sunlight, rubbing his eyes. That's not there. Do you know why it's not there? Because that's not resurrection. The isolated revival of a dead body is not the power of this story. Any of you who are familiar with the art of the Eastern Orthodox Church will notice that all the resurrection stories are communal. Jesus rises with Adam and Eve and others. This is resurrection. And for centuries, we've gotten ourselves in a knot, unable to absorb often the power of this story because we're fixated on what this body is and how could it move through a wall. What's going on here? The writer of the gospel is describing a remarkably powerful event that is happening with the disciples sitting behind closed doors, encircled by fear. And then all of a sudden, the fear is replaced by peace, by courage, by hope. And he's there. He's there, so present that you can feel his wounds. But who's not there? Thomas. The story predates Uber Eats, so Thomas was probably out getting food. He comes in and they tell him what happened, and he says, unless I can see the wounds on his hands and in his side, I don't accept your story. Now, what's going on here? Thomas's story of Jesus is actually what's getting in the way of his encountering the risen Christ. Thomas has carried inside him, as did all the other disciples, a story about this man Jesus, their leader, who was going to confront the powers, who was going to transform the system, who was going to become king of the Jews, who was going to restore Israel to its own power and governance, and maybe lots of other things. Whatever the story was in Thomas's head, it was killed on the cross. But it's still operating in his head in such a fixed way that when he hears all of his friends talking about how Jesus the Christ had showed up amongst them, it doesn't fit his story. And so he can't accept it. It's become a block. I want to turn to a quote from a wonderful Buddhist teacher named Angel Kyoto Williams. Anybody familiar with the teachings of Angel Kyoto Williams? She's a black woman, a Buddhist teacher in the United States who does a lot of work with black Christian ministers and preachers like Otis Moss III, whom anybody who studies, I see ministers nodding heads all over the room here, Otis Moss III. And they've worked together a lot on responding to the oppression of black people in the United States. She has a very powerful book called Waking Up from the Mind of Whiteness. And here's a quote. What she's referring to is the centering of whiteness to the exclusion of everybody else in our society. Once you recognize that there is something else operating that is beyond your ordinary sight, don't bother with the content. Watch the pattern. The content is a distraction from you being able to see the vastness of the construction. Because if you could see it, it would begin to fail. See, that's what's going on with Thomas. And it's not really about the mind of whiteness 2,000 years ago. It's about the mind of empire. The Roman Empire and the religious authorities in Israel that are cooperating with it have created a vast construction which says some people are more important than others, which says might is right, and which says if you don't believe us, we can kill you. And they've convinced Thomas they're right. Thomas cannot get outside the mind of violent empire. And then a week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side." What's happening? In this flash of insight, of encounter with the risen Christ, Thomas sees the whole pattern. He sees the vastness of the construction of empire and religious cooperation with empire. And when he sees the vastness of its construction, it fails. And then what does he see? He sees that there is a power greater than death. He sees that Jesus, his Christ, is still alive. And he's free. And you know what happens to him? He carries this story all the way to South India, preaching the good news and telling people all the way about emancipation from the power of empire, if only you can see. I'm looking at Chrysler, who grew up in Tamil Nadu. Thomas went all the way to the next state, Chrysler, Kerala. So the story goes. Emancipating the whole way. Well, friends, this powerful insight awaits us all if only we can step back and see the pattern. And sometimes the great construction that stops us from seeing it is actually inside ourselves, constructions we've generated. I want to take a couple minutes to tell a very personal story, because for me, this was, in my life, the most clear moment of this form of emancipation. It had to do with divorce. When I was in my mid-40s, I was married with 2 great little kids. I was a minister at a church in Halifax. Things were going great guns. We had lived in Fiji for several years, working on truth and reconciliation processes. I had a son born there. And I had this fantastic story of my life. Fantastic marriage, fantastic family, fantastic kids, fantastic job. And what was next? The next adventure. We were all going to go overseas again and work in another context. We were going to struggle against injustice. We were going to pursue justice and peace and reconciliation in another context. My boys would grow up with a second deep experience of a culture other than the one in which we were living. And then my marriage fell apart. Our marriage fell apart. And all those stories were done. We weren't going overseas again. This wonderful marriage, which just wasn't about 2 people being in love, but it was about a mission to pursue justice and peace in the world. This was done. The experiences my boys were going to have were done. And because we agreed on a 50-50 co-parenting, any form of vocational adventure I was about to pursue was done. But it was still in my head as a vast construction. And I kept waking up day after day and moving into a state of unhappiness because my world at home and at work and in the city would not conform to the narrative, the vast construction in my head. Luckily, I had a sabbatical. Probably was lucky, not just for me, but for everybody who had to deal with me. My congregation, my kids, everybody else. And I went to the desert. And I just walked and walked and walked and walked. And you know what happened? Jesus likes to hang around in the desert. He showed up. And speaking to me as he often did to his disciples, he said, Russ, you are being such a complete bonehead, it's almost unbelievable. Well, what do you mean? So look at you. You're in all of this beauty of the desert, the red earth, the blue sky, the footprints of the cougars, moving near the land of indigenous people in the Southwest, and all you can do is play tapes about how your ex-wife didn't live up to your expectations, or play tapes about how you're not going to get the job you want. Let them go. And what I saw was the vastness of my internal construction. And then I saw the role that internal construction had played in the ending of the marriage, along with other things. And I was free. And he said, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven, Russ. Can you forgive your ex-wife? Can you forgive yourself for what you did? If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. Well, you want to hold on to all these stories and the ways that they retain them, they're retained. Or forgive them and they're released. I actually met you at the Future Cafe, ironic, just upon my return to Canada from there. You were with Sarah. And I was in this wide open space, which you've commented on before. And I went back to Halifax, and I fell in love with my congregation again, and I was invited to co-chair the Living into Right Relations task group, and I got my boys half of the week, and I spent way more time with them in that half of the week than I was spending with them in a whole week. And there was resurrection in every aspect of my life. So what I invite you to, as I wrap up this sermon, is that moment. There is a moment for our church, for our congregations. But if we say, I will not believe until I see 47 children off to Sunday school, or I will not believe until this half of the choir grows to be as big as that half of the choir, and it's all balanced out in front of us, I will not believe. Or I will not believe until the new strategic plan of the United Church of Canada finally fixes everything and off we go, great guns again. I don't know what resurrection looks like for the church. I just know that we've got a vast construction inside of us and we need to let go, and it will be fantastic. And I would assume that most of you have inside of you, whether it relates to family or justice for Indigenous people or your work life or whatever, we have our constructions that we're holding on to. And we just need Jesus to show up and say, peace be upon you. Look, I'm wounded too. I invite you into the resurrection.
Well, if there are no other announcements, I have an announcement to share. It is with deep sadness that I share that the time has come for me to leave my role as St. Matthew's minister. Thank you, St. Matt's, from the bottom of my heart for the past almost 11 years together as you've embraced me as your minister. I so deeply care about this congregation and each member of our incredible community, which makes this really difficult news to share. In the fall, I'm going to be moving to a full-time position with Kindred Works, the United Church's development arm, where I've been working part-time in addition to my role here at St. Matt's, part-time since 2021. Over the past year, I've really found that having multiple jobs to provide full-time work for our family has no longer proved to be sustainable, especially with the amount of illness that our family has experienced over this past year. Although I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to get to move into this role full-time, and I'll still be working with the United Church in this capacity, as well as working with St. Matt's through our redevelopment project with Kindred Works, I am incredibly sad that in a few months I will no longer be your minister. It has been an incredible honor to work with you, and I am profoundly grateful for all of the love, patience, and support that you've shared with me over our more than a decade together. And while this is so hard, I do really feel like it's the right time for this transition for me, for our family, and indeed for St. Matt's. I'm incredibly grateful for our partnership with you, Bloor Street, which has added so much to our common life together. And part of what makes it feel like this is a good time for this change. St. Matt's, this is a big change, and I know that you are ready for it. In worship and in our life together, I often talk about what it means as humans, as people of faith, and as communities of faith to hold all of the life stuff together, the pain and the joy and everything in between. This announcement really feels like that. I believe so deeply that this is the right thing, and I know that you are ready for it, and at the same time, it's really, really hard. It can be both things all together at once, and it is. Being your St. Matthew's minister has indeed been my vocational calling. You are an amazing community, and I have such deep love for you. I truly believe that St. Matt's is one of the best congregations in the United Church because of all that you are and do and the ways that you live out church with faith, with care, and with such creativity. So I will be ending my time as your minister at the end of the summer. And due to our summer worship schedule and my remaining vacation and some study leave time, my final Sunday with our faith communities in worship will be Sunday, June 25th. Please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know if you have any questions or want to chat. Indeed, there will be lots of chats, lots of conversations over the next few months. And as we go into these next few months, I hope and I pray that we can journey together and that we can celebrate all that we have accomplished, because it really, really is incredible. Blessings to you all, my beloved St. Matt's community. Let's take a breath together. I need it. Thank you. Thank you. See, as folks have heard me say before, that when I was on my internship, my supervisor, she is a real crier. And she used to say that when she'd get to parts in her sermons or at funerals of a service that she knew would make her cry, she'd put things in the margin that would make her really angry, like slugs or injustice, so that when she was reading those parts, she could kind of, have a counter. Thought about doing that today, but I'm glad I didn't, because of all the feelings and all the love I want you to know and hold. So friends, as we go into this day, may we go with deep, deep courage. May we go with deep trust in God's love that is unending. May we go with God, presence and love of all. Jesus Christ, our companion, our mentor, our teacher, and the Spirit, whose inspiration is beyond knowing. May we take all of this made real through God and through each and every one of you out into the world, because the world is waiting. The world needs you. The world needs this type of courageous love. So let us go, knowing that we are never alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.